This holiday season, the last place you want to be is the naughty list. Rowan Campbell plays a bloodthirsty Santa in Silent Night, Deadly Night. Director Mike P. Nelson's grisly update to the most controversial horror film ever made is only in theaters December 12th. Go to sndnmovie.com for updates. This Christmas, Santa's gonna slay. Welcome to Scare You to Sleep. I'm your host, Shelby Novak, and I'm going to read you a bedtime story. Before we begin this week's tale, I caution you to look at the trigger warnings in the show notes. This story has heavier themes than we've had here in a while. Our protagonist tonight is a bad man. So, now that you've done that, or chosen to avoid spoilers, our tale this evening is from author Z.S. Orchid. This is Horsemen. Franklin Drescher was a hateful man, not shown love in many avenues of his life, and thus he did not show it to others. This wasn't rooted in some racial bias or other bigotry, but rather an overall disdain for people in general. He would keep to himself and his stories if he could, interacting with others only when it was necessary. His co-workers and the man behind the counter at the convenience store he frequented were the only ones who ever really heard his voice. It wasn't as if Franklin had anything particularly special to say. It was simply a matter of choosing whether or not to interact with his fellow humans. Franklin didn't have nearly as many bad interactions as one would think. His childhood aside, nigh everyone that spoke to Franklin regularly was pleasant to the crotchety man. His demeanor was little more than a response to things that could no longer be changed. It was ultimately his decision to act this way, and nothing seemed to stray him from this path. Even minor boons that came across him did little to change his mentality. In fact, he didn't much care for these changes. Things that didn't fit into his meticulous routines often just furthered his harbored hatred. Franklin was in the belief that the world was always trying to do him wrong, that he had been cursed at birth to suffer through the entirety of his life. This did not change when he came home to find the diagram on his wall. At first, he let out a simple, "What the fuck?" when it came into his eyeline. Once he approached it, his angry confusion turned a quizzical curiosity. The diagram itself was simple in nature. It was a spider diagram, often used in corporate settings or website building. One main point that branched into 4 different corners. It seemed to have been drawn in black Icarus ink that sagged at the edges like misused paint. Franklin hadn't even hung up his coat or dropped his bag as he stared at the oddity on his wall. All he wanted to do was make sense of it. The main point of the diagram was just his name, Franklin Drescher. The Icar had spelled his name sloppily, but it was undeniable that it was his. The diagram had messy lines pointing to the 4 images that surrounded his name, like a cloak. They depicted the same figure in different scenarios. The first thing that came to Franklin's mind was the Grim Reaper. They all seemed to be robed skeletons. One wielded a sword of flame, pointing it towards the yawning heavens. The second strode atop a horse whose hooves were crushing a mountain of skulls. The third wore rags and held its hands together as if to gather rainwater. The last of them held a large scythe, and perspective showed it to be pointing directly at Franklin. The man was filled with immediate rage. Someone had put this here for one reason or another. They were not going to get away with it. The police showed up later than he would have liked. He assumed they deemed it not an emergency, despite the fact that it was clearly a break-in of some kind. The 2 officers that arrived gawked at the strange mural in astonishment, even commenting on the handiwork. This only served to further Franklin's frustration. He demanded they figure out who did this and how. But after 40 or so minutes of searching the house, it was becoming abundantly clear that there was no evidence of a break-in. The officers asked Franklin if he had been drinking that night. Franklin swiftly and firmly told them both to leave his home. Franklin was left to look at the haunting image that now permeated his wall. He decided to ignore the break-in aspect for the time being, so he could focus on ridding himself of this evil. Bleach, industrial cleaners, elbow grease, none of it seemed to make a dent on the diagram. Whatever had been used to create it was incredibly strong. Someone had to be out to get him. It was all he could fathom. That was how this world was and always had been to Franklin Drescher. It was unworthy of his kindness, and proving that time and time again. Franklin's routine was now joined by the imagery on his wall. While he did nothing different, when he sat down to enjoy his stories, he couldn't help but let his eyes wander over the bizarre diagram. It seemed to stare back without eyes. He just knew somehow that it was mocking him. He tried to convince himself that it wasn't a big deal. His rage simmered into frustration, and he was able to continue on in his days. While he was unable to pry his attention undivided from it, he was still able to retain some sense of normalcy. It was more or less like he had incredibly ugly wall art now. Seeing as he never had house guests, it ultimately didn't matter. He'd prefer it gone, but he could live with it. Within a week of this occurring, Franklin had again found himself in his favorite convenience store. This was a place he would stop by after work nearly every day to either replenish his Marlboro Reds or to grab snacks as a substitute for real dinner. Aside from work, this was the only place he ever actively chose to visit. Scouring the aisles for something to satiate himself, he took notice of the large jerky sticks at the end of a particular aisle. The manufactured pseudo-meat seemed the perfect thing to limply grasp at dopamine while ignoring the havoc it wreaked on his body. As he walked towards it, a teenager with their hood up walked by and snagged the last of the particular brand Franklin had his eyes on. The boy walked towards the counter without considering Franklin for a moment. Franklin, however, considered this immensely. Something inside him boiled over. After the defamation of his home, the incompetence of the police, and now this slight, he was feeling that hatred of his at an inflated magnitude. While he'd been able to keep the rage from bursting for about a week, it had just been lingering at the surface, waiting for a reason to escape. He felt deep in his guts, a twisting usually saved for those who hadn't had a meal in weeks. It was agonizing. He couldn't have anticipated just how severe his hunger pangs had become. For the first time in the 3 years he'd been coming here, Franklin did not buy anything. He instead followed the boy out of the store. He followed the boy down the alley that the boy turned into. Franklin called out to him. He demanded that the boy hand over the ill-gotten gains. The teenager shrunk from his words, telling Franklin to leave him alone. All this did was further the man's ire towards this infraction. He grew agitated, itchy, and supernaturally uncomfortable in his own skin. Franklin pulled at his collar before he charged the boy. Franklin tackled the shy child to the ground. Letting out a yelp, the boy hit the concrete with a thud. Franklin reached for the snack stick he was after, but the image of a figure appearing in the alleyway with them gave him pause. In front of where he lay on top of the boy stood a picture he was all too familiar with. A skeleton in ragged clothing with extended hands. It looked at Franklin with sunken eyes while the teenager squirmed and screamed beneath the weight of the crazed man. Franklin understood what it wanted. The turning in his stomach began to grow in intensity. He was in so much pain from the growling that erupted from his gut. The boy thrashed and yelled beneath the weight of Franklin. Franklin's arms swung underneath the boy's mouth so he would go quiet. He dragged the boy towards the skeleton. As much as the teenager tried to free himself, he simply was no match for the power of the older man. Franklin dropped the boy from his arms into the extended hands of the creature. What happened next was that of a nightmare. The boy managed to let one sharp yell out before the impoverished skeleton sunk its teeth into his neck. Franklin stood in shock as the creature devoured the boy in front of him. Blood sprayed all over the alleyway when the boy's carotid artery was severed. A splash of crimson painted Franklin's stunned and horrified face. Bones snapping and flesh squelching echoed off the walls of the narrow alleyway. Franklin just reached down and grabbed his jerky stick. The monstrosity entered the passenger side of Franklin's car as he went to abandon the scene behind him. It spoke no words as he drove home, but instead held its blood and gore-stained hands up towards Franklin. He could not look at the thing. It had been mere moments since he watched organs of a teenager slide down the empty gullet of whatever this thing was. It still dripped with the remnants of the boy, and Franklin was nowhere near ready to face that truth. He could not comprehend what was happening. When he got home, the skeleton joined him still. It knelt beside him as he sat in his lazy boy. Franklin clocked the diagram as he sat, noticing that the vision of the ragged skeleton was now missing from it. He also noticed that his home had changed. The ichor that had drawn the diagram was now spreading like roots through the walls of his house. They pulsed with eagerness. His jaw still hung like a broken swing as the jerky stick he assaulted the boy for blurred his vision. Franklin was finding his appetite lacking. To his dismay, the creature never left his side. It sat and watched him as he watched his stories. It rode aside him in his car every day, The only stroke of luck was that no one seemed to see the thing. This was proven when it had followed him into his work, and no one said a word about the desiccated figure stalking him. The blood and viscera of the murdered boy had stained the creature's jaw and ribcage dark. Franklin's routine and performance at work suffered immeasurably. He could focus on nothing other than the skeleton wearing rags. As his day came to a close again, he found himself in the same recliner he always did, now accompanied by his bizarre companion. Turning on the TV, he was greeted with a picture of the boy he had tackled in the alley. Declared missing by the news outlets despite Franklin knowing the truth, that he had watched the creature beside him eat the boy alive. Franklin turned to face it and its outstretched hands. For the second time, he watched as its form changed. Its hands broke their pleading prostration to grip him by the arm. Slowly, it lowered its jaw onto his arm and broke the skin with ease. Franklin yelped in pain and pulled back, but the creature's mouth had already tightened around him, and skin tore from the retraction. Holding his arm in a wince, he knew what the creature wanted. If it did not get it, it would take it from him. This holiday season, the last place you want to be is the naughty list. Rowan Campbell plays a bloodthirsty Santa in Silent Night, Deadly Night. Director Mike P. Nelson's grisly update to the most controversial horror film ever made is only in theaters December 12th. Go to sndnmovie.com for updates. This Christmas, Santa's gonna slay. Franklin and the creature waited until the sun vanished in favor of the moon. He brought with him an old baseball bat from when he was a child, no older than the teenager he could not erase from his mind. They drove through the city as Franklin attempted to scour the streets for someone. He prayed quietly that the next would not be another kid. He couldn't stomach watching that again. He stole glances from the creature, whose sunken eyes never stopped staring at him, as if it worshipped him. They eventually neared a closing bar, where Franklin opted to park his car. They sat vigil outside of the watering hole. It would not be long before someone stumbled out in a drunken stupor. This poor soul did not opt for their vehicle, but instead smartly decided to walk home through the now silent city. Franklin and the creature exited his vehicle and followed the path carved by the drunk. The bat felt heavy in Franklin's hands, his age and his purpose all adding stones to the pile. He hadn't given it any practice swings. He was banking on the fact that the creature was desperate. If it were attempting to devour him, then it would certainly leap atop a twitching body. Only moments would pass before the drunk stumbled into the alleyway. The narrow strip of back road looked far too similar to the one in which he'd killed that boy. This made Franklin pause. He forgot for a second his own resolve, and the creature caught on quickly. Its ragged fingers dug into Franklin's right arm, a warning as to what could come should he not fulfill his duty here. The pain of sharpened bones did little to assuage his mounting terror. He barely noticed the blood trickling from his arm down to the asphalt. Still, he readied himself, the grip on his bat now tightening with fervor. But it was too late by then. The man had already caught wind of what was happening. His fist came like a freight train into the bridge of Franklin's nose. A sickening crunch followed as the bones in his face were decimated by drunken fury. This was no wayward teenager. This was a grown man throwing all his weight behind him to stop Franklin. Franklin's head crashed onto the ground with a thud, and the man climbed on top of him, seemingly paying no mind to the emaciated skeleton that stood beside Franklin. The monstrosity made no move to assist Franklin as the man pummeled him into the ground. Franklin took blow after consecutive blow, his vision beginning to flatten from the onslaught. In a surprising flip of the coin, Franklin reached blindly to feel a glass bottle that had rolled near the fight. He grabbed it without thought and swung it as hard as he could into the man's temple. There was no breaking of glass, just the impact of the makeshift weapon meeting the man's skull. It stumbled the man just enough for Franklin to break free of the beating and scramble to his feet. The bat now reclaimed, Franklin did not hesitate. The first swing of the bat knocked the man clean over. The second sent his body into convulsions, and the third ceased those convulsions altogether. Chunks of brain matter and shattered skull decorated Franklin's chin and philtrum. The famished skeleton waited no longer to descend upon the corpse. It was then that a whinnying caught Franklin's attention. It was a raspy sound, but distinctly that of a horse. His body turned involuntarily to face the sound. Another monstrosity, born from the diagram on his wall, was made manifest in his vision. A robed skeleton strode atop a horse. The horse was as skinless as the other creatures, with a black hood for its blinders. The creature reached its hand down beyond the horse's mouth, extending it for Franklin to take. He had already accepted what was happening to him. This was no mere nightmare. It was his own personal apocalypse. The breeze from the chilled air of the night did little to soothe the man's woes. As he rode behind the skeleton, his arms wrapped around the creature for balance, he wondered what it was he had done to deserve this. Was it simply his antisocial behavior, or was it merely coincidence? Questions rolled around in his mind like loose marbles, but the voiceless creatures would not answer them. They simply arrived after he had crossed off his hideous tasks from this invisible checklist. Franklin's appearance changed then. As he watched the news in his chair, he was now accompanied by the beings that had jumped off the wall and been made manifest. The horse rider was now missing from the diagram. The veins of black that spread throughout his walls were more prominent than ever before. Some were so bulbous now that they rhythmically pulsed, as if they each had their own heartbeat. Franklin looked sallow. The injuries he sustained from the man in the alleyway had left his own face as bulbous as these veins of ichor. He was changing with his house, a mirror of the hatred he had put into the world in order to save his own skin. The news showed both the missing boy once more and the man he had turned into a pulp of gray matter and gore. Franklin remained expressionless as he watched. Thought was no longer something he was capable of. To this end, it became easier and easier for Franklin to feed the creature in rags. Once he let go completely of his mind, kidnapping and murder became like breathing to him. The number of missing people increased weekly. If he fed them to the famished skeleton alive, he would find his own way home. Should he show them extreme violence, the horse rider would take him home. He often opted to use extreme brutality. It helped him stay anonymous, as none were able to see the creature or himself if he were atop it. No matter how much devastation he caused in his community, he was not caught. He also couldn't seem to find the means to make the remaining 2 figures in the diagram appear. What was he missing? Though it terrified him to think about, it was all he could consider as a way to end this. In his mind, so long as those 2 figures stood on his wall, there would be ceaseless more deaths in order to save himself. But what atrocity would he have to commit? What could be as damning as kidnapping and murder? Franklin found himself out at night, with the 2 creatures in tow once more. This time, he stalked a small neighborhood. It was a place he had not frequented, and traffic was minimal at this time of night. Someone else would vanish tonight, lest he be eaten by the famished thing himself. Franklin hid among the shadows of the sidewalk, donned in near invisible fashion, so that he could do as he always had, be swift and unseen, that is. Soon enough, clicking footsteps made their way his direction, and he pressed harder against the shadow to avoid detection. A woman, maybe late 30s, was walking in high heels towards him and back to the neighborhood. As monstrous as Franklin had become, he had always told himself he would not murder a woman nor a second child. He did all he could to regain control back from the monstrosities in the diagram. As he watched her, flame struck his collar. Heat enveloped his neck as he turned to see a horrifying sight. The third monstrosity had made its appearance, wrapped in the same robes but wielding a sword of flame and having pointed it towards Franklin's neck. The heat was excruciating. Sweat poured from Franklin's forehead at the touch of the blade. The figure pointed at the woman in a silent demand. Franklin didn't want to do this anymore. He was exhausted from this rampage he'd been forced into and wanted it to end. Maybe this new being would allow him a swift, merciful end. His life had gone too far askew now. There was no coming back from what he'd become. The figure brought the sword closer to Franklin's neck, and the man screamed in agony from the touch. It was molten, as if a volcano itself poured down his side, as would a shower. The moment did not pass swiftly. It pressed slowly against Franklin's skin as if searing a steak on a grill. Franklin's screaming increased in volume and in desperation. Soon, the sound of clicking heels could be heard moving toward him. His eyes widened. She didn't. She couldn't have. But as she came into his periphery, he knew that she had. "Are you all right? Do you need me to call someone?" The pain was gone, replaced now with the voice of the woman he had seen. She knelt beside him, brown eyes filled with worry as she looked upon him. Franklin needed to tell her to run, tell her to flee as fast as she could before what would inevitably happen. As he went to speak to her, he watched in terror as the skeletal hand of the famished figure reappeared and covered her mouth, dragging her to the cold ground. Franklin watched as she thrashed. The creature made no move to devour her, which confused him. His eyes pleaded towards the creature as she tried in vain to escape the grip. Soon, the figure strode atop the horse, then dismounted and joined the famished figure. Together, they pinned the woman down by her arms and legs before looking back to Franklin. Still,
His confusion ran rampant. This wasn't how they had reacted before. The heat from the sword returned. The armed figure stood beside him and placed one hand on Franklin's shoulder while gesturing with the sword towards the woman. The implication hit him like a ton of bricks. No. Franklin breathed lifelessly. I can't. I won't. You can't. The searing agony returned. The sword had been placed at his neck once more, a reminder of what was to come should he disobey their disgusting request. And so once more, Franklin obeyed. The return home on horseback this time was that of utter silence. No thought, no life behind his eyes. Franklin thought he could not grow more irredeemable than he already was. Tonight, he proved how incorrect he was about that. Franklin Drescher was a hateful man. Inside him roiled violence and disdain for his fellow humans. He had proven time and time again that he was capable of things even he himself decided were too far. With just a bit of push from pain, it turned out he was capable of approximately anything. The hate he had let fester in his body turned into cruel action against others. A child cannibalized, dozens of dead men, and now a woman raped. He hadn't thought himself capable of these things. The Horsemen had always known. Franklin sat again in his chair. He felt heavier than he ever had. He felt he was a stone, prepared to sink to the bottom of the ocean if he could indeed sink any lower. The house was now swallowed by the veins. Some had burst, leaving piles of discarded ichor throughout his home. He looked upon the diagram, which now showed no figures remaining, though he had only met the three. He didn't care. There was no heaven for him left. He knew this. He knew what he had done could not be forgiven, even in the eyes of the all-forgiving. The figure stood around him, a half-halo of his crimes in humanoid form. From the hallway, loud footsteps thundered towards the four of them. All of the figures turned their head, and upon sight of the thing coming, all knelt and bowed in reverence. Franklin's eyes did not move. He waited for it to appear in front of him, a robed figure wielding a large scythe. Its cloak obscuring its skeletal face as the tail of the robe dragged impossibly long back down the hallway. It stood mere inches away from where Franklin sat. Franklin had lost his fear. He looked up to the figure as it outstretched his hand, a knife held loosely in its bony palm. Franklin took it without thought. He knew what came next. Franklin Drescher was found in his recliner weeks later, after the neighbors complained of the smell. His wrists were sliced vertically, and evidence of his crimes were abundant. In the end, he was reviled for what he had done. There was no funeral. He was not mourned. No signs of the diagram remained. Franklin Drescher was a hateful man, and thus became
an incredibly hated man. Thanks for listening, and thank you to my author this evening, Z.S. Orchid. I really enjoyed producing this story. I think it's been a while since we've had a very evil protagonist, and I love stories where the protagonist is so evil. I don't believe in only following around the good guys. I think that's boring. So thank you, Z.S., for this story. And if you'd like more, you can follow the show on social media at scareyoutosleep. You can follow me personally at Shelby B. Novak. And you can join the Patreon page, patreon.com/scareyoutosleep. I don't know if I've ever mentioned it on the show, but I do have it turned on where you can get a 7-day free trial on Patreon. So if you'd like to just kind of poke around, see if it's for you before you make any sort of monetary commitments, then I have that turned on as an option. So go check it out. I apologize for the tardiness of this episode. It was Thanksgiving week. I spent a good while with my family. It was a much needed break. I was going a little bit to the dark place right before. It's been weird. Anyway, I'll tell you about it on Patreon. I'm going to do a Ramble You to Sleep at some point this week. And yeah, I just wanted to apologize for this episode being late, but it's an excellent story. Wanted to get it out. It is Sunday night. I'm so sorry. And I don't know how else to say sorry. So I'm sorry. I did a lot of baking and cooking this past week since it was Thanksgiving. I made Parker House rolls. I made a coconut cream pie. And I made green beans, and I feel like I made something else. What else did I make? I feel like I was cooking a lot this week. I feel like there was more. Probably it was a blur. I got to celebrate a surprise party for one of my cousins. I posted some pictures on Instagram and a gender reveal for my other cousin and Thanksgiving. It was a lot of, it was just an excellent week with family, and I'm tired, and thank you for bearing with me while I, go to all of these life events. I think I mentioned it last week, or maybe at some point I mentioned it somewhere. I feel very fortunate to be so loved that I'm included in all of these major life events for so many people that I also love back. But it has been quite the year of events. This week is no different. It's a lot of work events. So go see Silent Night, Deadly Night. I have a lot of things to do for that this coming week, where I will be getting footage for the network, going to several of those events. And so, yeah, go see Silent Night, Deadly Night. Just because it looks cool. It looks great. It is great, actually. I got to see it early because I get special little digital content privileges. So yeah, go see that. I am very tired, and I'm very grateful to you. If we're talking about what we're grateful for, I know a lot of my international listeners obviously do not celebrate. A lot of my American listeners don't celebrate Thanksgiving either, for very good reasons. But I will say I am grateful for all of you, and that's what I'm grateful for. And I am grateful for the pillow I am about to lay my head upon. All right, I will see you next week, and I'm trying to catch up with life. I know I mentioned before I'm taking extra gigs and things for obvious reasons, and so I'm just trying to find the balance in it all, and I'm only one lady. So again, until that mysterious relative I've never met kicks the bucket and leaves me a haunted castle and like a bunch of gold doubloons, I'll just have to figure it out, and that's fine. We're all just figuring it out. We're all just figuring it out, and I'm figuring it out right along with you. So here we go. Let's go figure it out together this week, and I will see you on time next week. I promise. Okay, I pinky promise. Okay, go get some sleep. Sweet dreams. This holiday season, the last place you want to be is the naughty list. Rowan Campbell plays a bloodthirsty Santa in Silent Night, Deadly Night. Director Mike P. Nelson's grisly update to the most controversial horror film ever made is only in theaters December 12th. Go to sndnmovie.com for updates. This Christmas, Santa's gonna slay.